to we had looked at the self-esteem model. I think we were going to start the development of self-esteem. Okay. Are you good? Okay, so we had looked a little bit at a couple of different models for self-esteem. So hopefully that you have that idea that this is something that is kind of learned. Really, it's not something I'm born with. And so parents, siblings, peer groups, all these people play a big role in how I feel about myself, right? And the worth that I place on myself. So when we look at different age groups, then if we check children under 10, and again this data is quite old, so you know, would we get the same results now that we did back then, when I think that these days parents are more aware of trying to be positive, you know, and give positive feedback, possibly too much so now. So things may have changed, but we're going to stick with, there was no update in the chapter on this, so we're going to stick with this data. Under the age of 10, they will depend on appraisals from peers and parents and outcomes to determine their physical competence. So, you know, what I notice on the playground quite often is that the young toddlers, so the 3 to 3.5, and then depending upon their developmental position, possibly up to 4, they really don't pay very much attention to the other children, right? They're not watching them and then going, oh, I can't do this. But once they hit 4, then you really do start to see them comparing themselves to the other children on the playground. And then that can become problematical, because if they're not as experienced, if they're not getting as much practice at home, or they're just not as physiologically capable, then we start to get this negative self-esteem about movement. They're not very accurate at this comparison, so that can be a bit of a problem, right? They're judging their physical competence, but they're not actually very accurate at that, so they may put themselves down when actually they are more capable than they feel they are, right? Children of all ages start to develop self-esteem from feedback and appraisal from teachers and coaches, so we have to be really careful with the language that we use. So there's a feedback model called the sandwich. So the sandwich represents the first layer of bread, represents the first thing you say. And so that should be positive regarding the trial that they just did. Okay? So well done, or you gave that a good go, or something very positive. And then the middle of the sandwich is the cues and the feedback related to the skill. So which piece of the skill are you going to try to correct? That's the kind of middle of the sandwich. So next time we try, let's see if we can take an even bigger step, right? And then the top piece of the sandwich, the next layer of the bread, is a motivational, positive motivational piece. So, okay, it's your turn again. Let's give this a really good go, right? So if you use that model, then we are giving feedback in a manner that allows children to feel more competent, you know, that their perception of their competence is a little bit stronger, right? And then they have positive reactions to physical activity and sports and things, instead of withdrawing and having these very negative feelings, right? So coaches who use encouragement, particularly with teenage boys, they can influence low to high self-esteem in teenage boys. Global praise, though, you have to be careful with. That doesn't work automatically with all children. So if you are a team coach, right, then telling the whole team you did a great job doesn't always work with everybody on the team, right? Because if some of the team members have low self-esteem, then their reaction to you saying, you did a great job, gang, right, is, well, so-and-so did a good job, but I missed that ball and I really fluffed up and we could have scored another goal if I'd done that properly, right? So you have to be a little bit careful with the global situation, right? And it's important that you give feedback in relation to the performance. Be encouraging, be corrective, right? Try really hard. It's difficult for the first thing that comes out of your mouth not to be, no, that wasn't right. Let's have another go. Right? So you mean it to be positive, but actually the very first thing you say is something that's very negative. Right? I said that, I said that, I said that. All right, we did that. Okay, so remember that we're looking at functional constraints interacting with social, cultural constraints. So emotions are very important here, okay? The emotions that are associated with your participation in physical activity or in a particular sport can affect your development of self-esteem. So the more I enjoy the physical activity or the sport, the higher my self-esteem and my self-perception and my motivation to have another go to continue doing it. All right, so at the beginning of the semester I said, you know, I spend a lot of time during the semester talking about how fun we have to make physical activity. And that really doesn't matter what age group you're working with, right? But it's particularly important if we're working with children that they're having fun. And often fun is tied to how successful they're being, right? So it all ties back to this idea that we have to be very, how do I set up the environment? How do I make sure there are different levels of challenge available so that my kids who are capable don't get bored, but my kids who are not very competent at these skills yet can still have enough success that they're enjoying themselves, right? That this is still fun, that I'll have another go, okay? So that enjoyment then in pre-adolescence, so 12 and under, and young adolescents, early teenagers, gets increased with their perception of their motor ability, right? So if I'm mastering skills, if I'm getting better at skills, then that really impacts enjoyment. If I have parents that don't push me to do something, right, and they just sit back and are supportive, and they pay the money and they do the car run, but they don't say, well, did you make that skill today? Great, let's back off, right? and coaches who are very supportive, right? All of that is very important, because if I'm successful, then I take pride, right? And I'm enjoying something. If I'm failing all the time, then I get disappointed in myself, or I feel very stressful about this thing, and I don't want to go, right? My self-esteem gets a knock, my motivation goes down, you know, the parent says, okay, it's time to go to soccer now, get your kit and your bag, and the kid goes, oh, I don't really want to go today, I'd rather stay home and read my book, right? So this is a term that we have that I've never seen this term used outside of motor behavior, but then I haven't taken a lot of psychology classes, so it might come up in the psychology literature. Causal attributions. So causal attributions are when you have a conversation with someone, what reason do they give for being successful or not successful? So when we relate this idea to movement skills, right, what are the reasons that a child or an adult will say, oh, I didn't do that well because, or God, that was cool, I nailed that because, right? So what are those reasons? Who gets the credit for the success or the failure, all right? Or what gets the credit for the success or the failure, right? And what we find when we look at these causal attributions, at these statements that people make and children make, is that they're very different depending on whether the individual has high self-esteem within that domain or low self-esteem within that domain. So again, if we're looking particularly at movement, do they have high self-esteem in physical activity and sport, or low self-esteem, right? And we find that individuals tend to act in a way that confirms that belief and perpetuates the cycle, right? So the beliefs that they have are also evident quite often in these causal attributions. So if I have low perceived competence at this skill and I have low self-esteem, then I perform poorly. And then I'm able to turn around and go, see, I told you I couldn't do it, right? And so then we have this negative spiral. And vice versa. If I have high perceived competence and quite high self-esteem, then I'm going to give the performance my best shot, and I can turn around at the end and go, whoa, I did it, or no, I didn't quite make it, but I'm going to give it another go, right? So there's totally different situations there, contexts there, that I have to work with as the teacher or the coach or the movement expert. Right? So an individual who has high self-esteem will make statements that tend to be internal. So I'm responsible for my success, but I also take responsibility when I don't do so well, right? So I'm able to influence the outcome of the skill or task. They also will make statements, causal attributions, that are relatively stable. So the fact factors that influence success or failure are pretty consistent from one situation to the next. I don't change my mind each time I try the skill as to why or why not it worked, right? And they're controllable. I'm in control of these factors that influence the outcome, right? So my success is due to my hard work, right? My talent, how hard I worked for that. I can achieve that skill again. I can repeat it and it will still be successful. So it's stable. I'm saying that I believe this is stable, right? And it has nothing to do with luck, right? It's controllable. So this is important because when you talk to a lot of successful athletes, when they fail, right, their perception of that failure is often, it's just a blip, right? I'll just practice harder and it'll be okay the next time, okay? Now, when we look at people who have low self-esteem, the picture is slightly different. These statements kind of flip, and now we look at reasons that are external, right? It's outside of me. They're unstable, so the influence fluctuates. It can be different, attempt to attempt. So there's some luck there, right? And luck also plays into it's uncontrollable, okay? I can't control whether I'm successful or I fail. I don't get to influence the outcome. So, for example, the failure's due to my lack of ability, right? Or the wind was blowing so hard I couldn't run very fast today, right? And I can't repeat, if I was successful, it was a one-off. You know, there's no guarantee I can do it again the next time. And if I am successful, then it's probably just because I was lucky on that go, right? So when you listen to this verbiage, right, it's very, very different between someone with high self-esteem and someone with low self-esteem. So as you get practice with that, you can start to identify who has high self-esteem, who has low self-esteem, right? How do I help the person with low self-esteem? All right? And we see this effect from children through adults. So children with high self-esteem give these internal, stable, controllable reasons for outcomes, right? And their expectations for success are higher because their perceived competence is good, right? Children with low self-esteem take the external, uncontrollable route, and they often make inaccurate attributions for outcomes, right? They'll blame it on something that really had nothing to do with the outcome of the skill, all right? Because their perceived competence is low, right? And the problem then is why we want to be able to identify this particular group of children is that when we don't have fun, when we're not enjoying ourselves, when our perceptions of our competence are bad, our option is to withdraw, right? So they often won't try tasks that they perceive as too challenging for them, right? They won't even try. They'll just say, oh no. Right? They don't put forth effort. And that's a really interesting one Because if I don't put forth effort, I can't be successful, right? And if I don't think I can be successful, then I don't want to put forth a lot of effort and fail, right? So sometimes we'll see children and individuals just not trying, right? Well, they don't want to try and fail. It's better to not try and fail in their heads, right? When you're a high self-esteem person, these thought patterns make no sense at all, right? So you just have to accept the literature and go, okay, there's no point in telling them just to try harder, because that isn't going to work, right? They don't want to try hard and fail. So I have to make the failing go away first before I tell them to try harder, right? They'll avoid participating altogether if they can, right? So they'll forget their gym gear, or they'll bring a fake note from their parent, right? So what's really interesting is that we can retrain, so parents and teachers can retrain children. It's harder with adults, so we're looking at children right now. We can retrain them, the kids with low self-esteem, and we can help them develop better perceived competence and better self-esteem. So if you go to page 327, there's a model there for teachers and parents, all right, for adults to help retrain children with low self-esteem, all right? So they attribute their failure to lack of ability, and they attribute their success to luck. We're going to work with that child, and if you look at this model, we've got 5 elements of this model that we can gradually work on to help this child's self-esteem and perception of motor competence, right? So I can emphasize improvement through effort. So this is really important, and it's a major underpinning factor of mastery climate theory, right? So if you go back to the lecture that Dr. Parrish gave us, you know, one of the underpinning theories here is that if we run a mastery climate, the point is to teach these children that they can gain mastery over these skills, right? So the more effort I put forth, the more mastery I develop, right? And within that kind of climate, the kids can learn that almost intuitively, okay? We emphasize improvement through continued practice, right? Having one go isn't enough. I have to keep practicing, just like we do with our academic material, just like we do with our movement skills, just like we do with baking a cake, right? How many people bake a really amazing cake the first time they ever try it, right? You have to keep practicing, okay? We provide progressive learning experiences. So tie it into our MSU chart, right? If they are at stage 2, they're not going to stage 5, they're going to stage 3. So how do I set up the environment and the task to help them progress from stage 2 to stage 3? Ignore stage 4 and 5, they're coming later, right? Encourage goal setting. So don't set the goal for them, right? So I won't use it this semester because I don't have enough people who know what they're doing to make it safe. But I have a climbing net that I hang up on the wall for the kids to climb up, right? And I have to remind my students every single time, don't tell the kids to climb and touch the red pole, right? That's not, they have to set a goal of where they want to climb to, right? You can't say, okay, let's climb up the net and touch the pole. You just made that whole activity unattainable for a pile of kids, right? And we have to give accurate feedback, right? Don't say, oh, that was well done, if it was awful, right? Say, well, you tried really hard, right? Don't say they did well at the skill if the skill was ghastly, right? You can't lie to children. They're very acute. They know the skill was ghastly, right? Praise the thing they did well. Okay? So I think that model is useful, is a great tool for parents and other adults and teachers, right? If I can identify the child with low self-esteem, then I can really honestly help them improve, right? One thing, if you're working with very young children, they can't always distinguish between ability and effort, right? So the younger toddlers on the playground have a harder time understanding that I have to just keep trying, I have to put forth effort to have success, right? So that takes practice and time. You know, and young children, very young children will often score high on perceived competence even when they can't do the skill. Like if you ask a 3-year-old or a 3.5-year-old or a young 4-year-old, can you tie your shoelaces? And they'll go, oh yes, I'm great at that. They can't tie their shoelaces yet, right? So, you know, but that's okay, because if they're in that position, that is easier to work with than someone that goes, no, I can't tie my shoelaces, I'm hopeless, right? That's a harder mindset to get around, right? So learned helplessness is becoming a big problem with young children, all right? Learned helplessness. So they learn that they can't do it because we step in and do it for them too often, right? So the parent who's trying to get the kid to school and they're trying to do their shoelaces, right? Well, I don't have 20 minutes while they keep trying to tie their shoelaces. I'm just going to get in there and get it done because we've got to get out, right? Or the kid that can't climb the climbing net. Well, I'll just pick them up and lift them up there. No, no, no. Don't do that. Learned helplessness is very difficult to overcome as I get older, right? They have to learn to be independent, they have to learn to put forth effort and to keep trying over and over again. Because that's the only way success comes. Doesn't matter what domain you're in, right? It's the only way we get great grades is just to keep trying, keep practicing, keep reading, keep reviewing. Right? It's the only way we achieve motor skills. Keep trying, keep practicing. All right? So adults take a slightly different approach when they're evaluating themselves. All right? The most important factor is paying attention to what I've been able to do in the past, what I can do now, right? What I can't do now, okay? So I see this with my dad a lot. Now he's about to be 85, and he's amazing for 85, but he compares himself to himself at 65 or 55 all the time. Well, I can't do this anymore. Well, you're 85. Do you want to be dead? Because that's the option, right? And sometimes it's a little frustrating having those conversations with your parents, right? So their actual experience plays a big role in these causal attributions. Then we have these vicarious experiences, right? I'm comparing myself to someone else I'm watching at the gym, or I'm comparing myself to someone I'm watching on the TV, right? And that one is interesting because as we get older, there are very few older models on the television or in the magazines or at the gym, right? So that model for observation is not so readily available as we get older and older, right? Then we have verbal persuasion from others, very weak influence. That doesn't work well with adults, right? It's very hard to persuade an adult a different opinion, right? Like I said on Tuesday, I think, if I put a dress on and I look in the mirror and I think, blech, and Brian comes in and goes, oh, that looks nice, and I look in the mirror and I go, blech, and I have to change the dress, right? So that influence of another person trying to persuade me that actually it looks okay, it doesn't work very well, right? And then the last element is my physiological state, right? And for older adults in particular, they're very well able to recognize that their hands don't work so well anymore, or they're not as fit or as strong, okay? So the key here is that self-esteem is not a solid entity, right? It's something that fluctuates across the lifespan, right? It doesn't stay the same for my whole life, right? So we can influence, we can help older adults have better self-esteem, right? If we give them the appropriate movement programs and they feel a little bit stronger and they feel like they've got better balance, then they feel more confident and they have higher self-esteem, right? So that's a nice thing to know. What would be even better is how do we persuade people just to stay physically active all the way through their life so we don't have to provide them with an intervention movement program when they're in their 80s, right? Because they never stopped doing physical activity and exercise, right? That would be the ideal situation if we could pull that off somehow. Alright, so motivation is another functional constraint. Alright, so all of these are functional. What is the person thinking inside their head or feeling in the pit of their stomach? Right? So self-esteem links to motivation to continue to participate for children and for adults. Alright, so this again is interesting when we look at the fact that we don't have adults continually staying physically active, then it's quite interesting when you try to be a personal trainer or be a health and wellness coach, things like this, right? Because getting people to take that first step and say, yes, I want to get in better shape, I want to be more healthy, right? Takes a lot of motivation. So you need this massively high level of motivation to begin to take part in physical activity if you've been sedentary. So that could be your doctor saying, you know, if you don't do something about this soon, you're going to end up in the hospital, right? Or it could be something less positive, like I'm overweight, I'm obese, I've never had a boyfriend, maybe if I lose weight and I get in better shape, someone will like me, right? That's not a very positive approach, but it's pretty motivational, right? And then once you've got them into the program, then the key is keeping them going, right? Maintaining their participation in physical activity and exercise and sport, right? So often as the teacher or the coach, your role is less about particularly if you're working with adults, less about correcting technique and more about keeping them motivated to keep coming back, right? So these are important ideas because we have to understand with the obesity epidemic that we're facing now, we have to understand why people drop out of these things that we know are very beneficial for them, right? So if we can understand something about self-esteem and motivation, then perhaps we can keep more people engaged in something that is going to make them more healthy, right? Oh, okay. I think I said most of that. Back to our children, if we look at why do children persist in physical activity or after school sports clubs, things like this, then we have a list of ideas that children will give, right? If you just have a conversation with them and you say, oh, well, how come you like coming to after school gymnastics? So they'll say things like they want to get better at it, right? Or, you know, they want to get onto the gymnastics team, right? So they have a goal. They'll often say that they come because their friends come and they want to spend time with their friends, or they think they could make friends, so particularly for kids who have moved into a new area and they don't have friends yet, they'll often say, well, I thought this would be a good way to make friends. Some children like to be part of a group, okay, an identity. Well, I think when it says team, I read team as an identity more, right? Some will say, oh, I wanna be, you know, I wanna compete and I wanna win when I compete. Some will say, well, I just wanna have fun and this is a load of fun. And if you're working with teenagers, young children don't tend to talk about improved fitness, but teenagers will talk about, well, I want to get in better shape, I want to be stronger, I want to be faster, I want to be leaner, right? So then it's interesting to start taking these answers and split them by sex, right? What do the girls say versus what do the boys say? Okay. So typically, not always, you know, a very competitive young girl might not say this, but typically girls will say, well, I want to have fun, you know, I want to be with my friends. If it's a teenager, I want to be healthy, right? The boys, though, will much more often say, I want to win, right? I want to be in the competition and I want to win, right? So it's quite fascinating to look at intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, right? Extrinsic motivations generally are not very useful in the long run, right? So I'm not a big fan, she says, probably upset all the parents and the coaches in town. I am not a big fan of this idea with children and youth sport where everybody on the team, everybody who plays gets a medal, right? Or a little cup. Okay? What good is that? And that's hopeless, right? Or the parent in the supermarket who says, if you will just stop crying, I'll buy you some sweets. Right? Extrinsic rewards, extrinsic motivation. Very short term, short-lived, do not promote long-term engagement in good behavior or in sport, right, or physical activity. What we want to develop is intrinsic motivation, right? I want to do this because I want to get better, right? Or I want to stop crying in the middle of Walmart because I don't want to embarrass myself anymore. Okay? Difficult. It's difficult. If the child, if the person isn't intrinsically motivated by personality type, if you have someone who just has to have external reward all the time, right? You know people like this, very needy people, right? They're always like, well, do I look good? Or did I do a good job? Right? Right? If I'm asking that question, I'm needing external reward, external motivation for what I'm doing. Then why do children drop out of after-school clubs and PE and things like this, right? So the reasons for dropping out, it has to be said that the majority of children drop out because they want to try a different sport. So they don't drop out of physical activity and sport. They drop out of soccer because they want to go and try tennis. Right? So you have to be a little bit careful with the data on dropping out. Right? Or they drop out of the gymnastics team, but they still come to the recreational class and do gymnastics every week. But they just don't want to do it at that level. Right, that high intensity. Or if they're teenagers, then they might drop out because they want to get a part-time job so they can start saving to buy a car. Right? So often the reasons for dropping out are actually quite positive. Right? So it's a relatively low percentage of children that give these very negative responses for dropping out. Disliking the coach can be a big one. You know, particularly if the coach doesn't play them very often, or the coach is mean, or you know, something like that. Lack of playing time, too much pressure, so we have to win. You know, and when we don't win, that's bad. Or pressure from the parents, right? Or there's just too much time required, takes too long, I don't have this much time. It's not fun, I'm not getting any better, I'm not being successful, right? So, whilst it's a small-ish number of children that would give these types of replies, it's important that we pay attention to these children, because these kinds of reasons that they give can be, these are going to be the group of children that become lifelong sedentary people, right? Moving isn't fun, right? I'm not successful. It takes too much time. Okay? We covered this in lab, really, so I think this is just a quick reminder slide for us. The difference between a teacher-centered approach to physical activity, PE, recreational sport club, right, any of this, versus a student-centered approach. So the teacher-centered approach, the instructor sets up and presents developmentally appropriate activities. The instructor chooses when the student gets to try either a different skill or the next level of the skill they're on, versus the student has control over their engagement and the decisions that are made. So you'll remember Dr. Parrish talking about autonomy. Right? One of the things I like about Mastery Climate versus a station approach is that the children have autonomy. They get to choose which activity they go to and how long they stay there, right? And big one, that the effort is linked to the outcome, right? Really important that we spend time linking effort put forth to the outcome that occurs and the progress that occurs. Okay, so this figure is in the book, and this is a model that is trying to pull together, when we're not looking at children, now we're looking at adults, right? How can we predict adult activity levels, adult participation, right? So what we see typically is that the amount of activity goes down in adulthood, right? So when you guys leave college, the literature would expect that you won't be as physically active once you leave college as you are in college, right? Because lifestyle changes, right? I have to get a job, or I have a family now, or I have to get 2 jobs, right? So it becomes, it's not that adults are physically inactive, it's that the lifestyle changes in such a way it becomes harder and harder to stay active, right? To make that time for myself becomes harder. That's why I think it's important to think, so in exercise physiology, we do a project where I'm trying to get you to think outside of just exercise and sport, right? What other ways can I be physically active? Because they're more likely to be your outlet as you get older, right? Women, in particular, do less and less physical activity. Once you're over 65, only about 1/3 of adults in the US take the recommended levels of physical activity, 65 and older. And the reasons for the other 2/3 aren't always physiological. You know, it's not I'm ill or I have arthritis in my knees or something like that, right? So we have to look at this idea here, you know, what are my perceived options? Okay? So not what are my options, what are my perceived options? Okay? So, particularly as I get older, right? What if the rec center in town makes no effort at all to program classes and activities for senior citizens? Right? What do I do? Okay? My sense of self, right? Do I believe it's important for me? Right? My personal incentives, why do I want to do it? Is it fun? Do I feel better? Do I get to meet with my friends? Right? My dad, I keep going back to my dad, but my dad made a very funny comment on Sunday when I was FaceTiming with him because he and his wife paused their membership of the very fancy gym that they go to when coronavirus started. So they've spent 6 months now working out in the garage. So they have a stationary bike, they have some pulley systems set up, they've got a load of weights, my dad's old weights from when I was little, they cleaned them all up and things like that. So he made a comment that he's made more progress physically, he's made more progress, stronger, fitter, etc. in the last 6 months than he had done in the last 6 years at the club. And I said, well, that's because when you're at the club, you talk too much. And he burst out laughing. Because it's true, because part of going to the club is the social aspect, right? It's not just the, oh, I'm going to exercise and keep healthy. It's I get to go and gossip with all the old chaps in the gym, right? So personal incentive is very important, okay? So personal incentives then, desire to demonstrate mastery, possibly compete, to be with others, right? This is my kind of group. This is where I get to socialize. Okay. Also to cope with stress. My sense of self, particularly my self-esteem for motor competence, right, and physical activity, and my opportunities. All right. What if I don't have a car, or I'm not allowed to drive because my eyesight has deteriorated and they took my driving license away, but the nearest senior citizen center that does some Tai Chi is not a walkable distance away, right? So all these kinds of, or I'd really like to try to play tennis, but I'm old and I've never played tennis before. Well, you know, if you watch the US Open or Wimbledon or the Australian Open or the French Open, right, these really big tournaments, they all have senior tournaments, right? If we go to the Olympics, there is a senior Olympics, but we don't see it on the telly, right? So if I'm not someone that's always been involved in sport and I don't see role models on the telly because that isn't what they show us, right? So it's getting a bit better. Certainly tennis is getting better. There's also wheelchair tennis tournaments. They're getting much better at showing the wheelchair tennis. Not a lot, but a little bit, right? Then I don't recognize that old people play tennis, right? So participation can be impacted by factors that aren't just physiological, right? These more functional ideas, not my structural issues that I've got going on. So that, you know, there are stereotypes of what is and is not appropriate. So if I do sometimes actually, if you walk down through Greyhound Arena and I'm doing cartwheels in the hallway, right? Then you're going to go, okay, Dr. Wall's having one of her funny turns, right? Because people in their late 50s don't do cartwheels. Well, why not, right? But that's not the perceived behavior, right? We've already said limited access. My childhood experiences, so if my PE experiences were very negative, maybe I don't want to try this now, right? What are my personal limitations? Is it safe? Okay? What if exercise is going to hurt me? What if it's harmful to my health? Right? Lack of role models, we've already talked about. Not knowing what is and is not appropriate for me at my age. Okay? All right, so lots of different reasons that don't necessarily relate to my physiology, right? The reasons can be different between the sexes, right? Men and women give different reasons for their participation or lack of participation. And it can change across age groups. So again, it's not something that's stable, right? This is why the textbook is called Lifespan Motor Development, because motor development isn't a stable entity, right? It doesn't just stop when you're 20. Okay? I think we're there. Do you think men or women have lower self-esteem for physical activity as they get older?
Women.
Yeah, that's what the research would say. So I have some pictures for you. I don't know if you're going to be able to see them. I hope you can. Maybe let's turn the light on. Can you? Thanks. So these are quite old now, but I do love them. This was an article many years ago in People magazine, but this was taken from the World Masters Games in Sydney. And so, can you see this? So here is this lady.
Yes.
This is a lady who is, or was, because this was in 2009, so it's highly unlikely that she's still alive. She was 100 years old, and she's throwing a hammer event. And then this lady competed in the swimming at 90 in the freestyle. And this, I think this gentleman was 84 and he competed in the pole vault. This chap was 81 and he was in weightlifting. And then this lady was 99 and she was in the table tennis tournament. Right? How cool would it be for your grandparents if they had role models like this when they turn on ESPN to watch a game, right? Wouldn't it be great if some of the time ESPN showed these people? So that it's just kind of accepted that you keep moving and you keep being physically active and you keep taking part in sport and exercise. You know, I don't want to compete, right? I'm not interested in competing. So this wouldn't necessarily motivate me to go and compete, but it would motivate me to go, oh, okay, if she can still play table tennis at 99, I can play table tennis, right? I don't have to compete. Like, I play tennis with my friends, and we don't compete. I don't play tennis with Brian because he's very competitive and he doesn't want to just knock the ball back and forwards, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool stuff. Cool beans. Okay, so we're done on that block of material, which means that Tuesday will be our review session, and Thursday will be the exam. I'll do the same thing. I'll open it up early in the morning and keep it open all day. I will try to work out how to set it up a different way so that there's a clock visible for you. I didn't realize that that other way didn't show you the clock, so there's got to be a way of doing that. I just have to ring distance learning and ask them how to set that up. Okay? Any questions?
None that I can think of.
No? What about you, Jean? Any questions?
Not really. I'll email you. Will we be free and all afterwards so we can discuss my courses for next week?
I don't have any more appointments until next Monday.
Okay.
So if you email me, then we can set you up an appointment for Monday.
Okay. That'll work.
All right?
Sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, just keep working on those. I did not do any filming this week at the playground because there are people that haven't done any playground analysis yet, and those of you that are kind of trying to keep up still have a couple. So I figured we'd take a week off and then we'll go again on Monday. The weather's going to be windy, which won't be great, but we'll give it a try and get another. I've got the throwing target. We haven't used the throwing target yet, so I want to get that out for the kids to play with and give you some throwing behaviors to watch. What else? I think that's it for this class. I'm getting all my classes muddled up in my head now. So if you don't have any questions, I'm gonna sign off. Have a lovely day.
Sounds good.
Have a
And
great one.
stay safe, and
Will do.
I'll talk to you next week. Have a great weekend.
You too.